Hey everyone, Alex here from Luftformat, and welcome to this new course series where I take design projects of mine, show you the techniques I used, show you what decision making went into the designs so you can recreate them yourselves and hopefully apply something to your own workflow. Today I want to take a look at 4 animation techniques I have in this zigzag design reel I dropped recently. It's going to be fun. I want to keep this fairly digestible and to the point, so let's just get started. I have After Effects open here, and I think I'll start off with this one, which is this I to A zigzag transformation animation. I'll start by creating a new composition. I'll call this zigzag 1. 2000 by 2000 pixels is fine. 30 frames per second, 300 frames. Press OK. Next, I'll want to create a background, so I'll bring up a new solid by pressing Ctrl or Command Y and calling this BG. Make sure it's the comp size, which should be the default, and then select a nice grayish color. I like locking my backgrounds just so I don't move them around accidentally. I'll follow this up by just creating some text by going over to the text type tool and just clicking here and typing out my word, which is zag, in this nice typeface I've been really enjoying lately, which is Pangram Supply Mono, the medium weight. All right, get this centered with the align tool. If you don't see this, you can go to workspace. Actually, no, you go to window and then align, and that will open this up. The key to this first animation is transforming these letters into individual shapes so I can modify them the way I want. I'll do this by right-clicking on my text, going to create, and then create shapes from text. This will create a new layer, which is just a shape layer, and hide the text layer. I can actually just delete this. So we have these letters here. I want to have them on individual layers each. So I'll duplicate this twice, call this one Z, call this one A, and call this one G. I'll then bring up the contents for all of these and just delete the ones I don't need. So for the first one, I'll delete these, then I'll delete these, and then I'll delete these. So now I have a Z, an A, and a G. Okay? To animate this, I'll start off with the A to I animation. In the reference, you can see it kind of moves around, and the A transforms into an I, then turns, and then goes back to being an A. I'll do this by just selecting this and then bringing up some guides so I have a nice corridor where I can tuck all of these points into. I'll do this by pressing Command R or Control R to bring up my rulers, then just dragging out some guides from here. I want to connect this to this point, then get one for the other side as well, and then also maybe one for the middle, just so I have some nice guides that I can use to align these points. And because I turned this text into shape, this means I can now individually move all of these points the way I want. So for the animation, what I'll do is I'll just have this selected. Wait, I'll collapse these for now just so we're focused on the A. Have this selected, search for path. This will bring up the path properties of the A. We have 2 here because we have a hole in the middle of the A. If this were a letter like an E, we would just have one path. But I'll drop keyframes for both of them by pressing this stopwatch. I'm at 0 frames. By the way, if you don't see the frame counter, you see the seconds. You can do this change by pressing Command or Control and then just clicking on this watch here. And this will convert it from seconds to frames. I like working with frames because it just makes it a lot easier to animate. So I have 2 keyframes dropped at 0 frames. I'll move forward to 20 frames and then just start modifying. Drop 2 keyframes here. And now I'll select this A and select all of the points I want to move. So this one, hold down Shift to select multiple points, and all of these on this side. And then just drag it over until it snaps into place. I also want to bring this one back. And then I'll do the same thing for the other side. So select these points over here. Drag these over. And then tuck this point back in. Beautiful. This means we now have a simple animation going. As you can see, this will now collapse. This is good. I'll give this a couple of frames of pause. So I want to have the animation stay on the eye and not straight away transform back into the A. So I'll do this by just skipping forward 3 frames, let's say, to 23 frames, drop keyframes again, so nothing will happen in between these 2 keyframe sets. The animation happens between these, but anytime you want to add a pause, just add identical keyframes someplace later in time. But now to animate it back to the initial position, I'll skip forward 20 frames again, so to 43 frames, because we have 20 plus 3 and then 20 again. And then I'll just copy these keyframes over by selecting them and pressing Command C and then Command V to paste them to have this nice loop. I can actually just skip forward 3 frames again and copy all of them. This will just make the whole animation repeat once and then once again. So if we watch this back, we have this very simple A to I animation. In the initial example, you can see I have these Z and G letters that are rotating around this. So we'll take care of that next. I'll do this. This is even simpler actually than the shape animation because I'll just be animating the position property. I'll collapse this for now, or actually no, I won't, because I want to have this as a reference for where to drop my keyframes. So I'll select both of these, press P on my keyboard to bring up the position. I think I want to push this more to the edge. Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'll drop some keyframes for both of these position values, but I want to have them start in the corner already. So I'll drag this one up to this corner and this one up down to this corner. And now I want these to move in opposite directions. So I'll skip forward to my first set of keyframes here, which were at 20 frames, and I'll make a change to the position. I'll drag this one up to this corner and this one down. Then I'll do the same I did before, just create a little pause by adding additional keyframes here, go to the next set, then I'll move this over until it feels right. This is very loose, by the way. Not really worried about having everything be pixel perfect at this stage. And then we have our first animation ready. Now I want this to bounce back again, so I'll add another pause here. Then go to the next keyframe set. And what I can do again, just to make this be a bit more exact, I can just take this value we have here and copy it over to the next position. So I'll just take this value here, highlight it and press Command C to copy, and then go to 66 frames and then just paste it here. So we have the identical position values here and here. I'll do the same thing for this one. Just copy it over. And then we'll just add one more pause and go to the starting position by copying over these keyframes again. Okay, so the basic animation is already set. This is all just in linear keyframes, so there is no real nice speed curve to any of this. We can change this by selecting all of these keyframes and then pressing F9 to easy ease them. And this will just make the animation look a lot smoother. You could, of course, also, similar to the original example, add a rotation in between. Feel free to do that. It's really simple. Just animate your rotation property like we did with the position property, basically the same procedure. All right, so this is the animation. Let's go to the next technique. Next, let's tackle this portion right here. So we have this zigzag pattern in the background, distorting our type, and then a nice typographic overlay over that. I'll just duplicate this composition to have the same properties. Go into that. I'll delete these text pieces. We'll create new ones. Also get rid of these guides. I'll start by just creating another zag text. I'll get rid of all of this tracking I have set up here. Center that. I want to scale this up actually. I want this to really fill the screen. And then I'll just start maybe here, bring up the position by pressing P, drop a keyframe. I'll go forward in time to something like 80 frames. And then I'll drag this over to the other side. Let's see how the speed of the animation goes. This is pretty good. And now the key to get this zigzag look right here is adding an effect called wave warp. And I don't want to add this to the text layer itself. What I'll do is I'll create a new adjustment layer by going to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. We'll call this Wave Warp. And then I'll go over to Effect, Distort, and then all the way down here is Wave Warp. It'll look kind of to what we want at the beginning, but obviously these are way too round. I mean, it's an aesthetic you could go for, and with these courses, I always want you to experiment on your own and just take these as a reference point, because it's always more interesting to just play around and see what you can come up with. But if you want to achieve the exact same result I did here, what you want to do is change this sign to sawtooth, and that will create these harsh edges. And then it's just a matter of adjusting this and also this. So the wave type we have, and then the wave height and width. These two things especially. You can also play with the angle. I'd keep it at 90 degrees to start with, and then just play around really. And if you want to have really blocky panels, you can just crank this up all the way and create something like this. Or you can create a more refined version and have more of these zags going on. And the cool thing about this setup is that we can add anything under this adjustment layer and it will also be affected. So I can take an image, for example, drag it under a text, and you can see it will also react to our wave warp effect. So the next step would be to just add over a nice text overlay. I want you to experiment with that, try out different layouts, and also feel free to play with some of these other wave types here. Maybe even try out something like square to achieve a really interesting but different result. Let's go over to the next technique, which is this tiled pattern right here. I'll create a new composition once more, call it zigzag 3. Press OK, create a background, lock it. And then this is essentially just a lot of manual labor, but I'll show you how to achieve it. All you have to do is take this rectangle tool over here, have a nice fill color, some dark gray is what I went with. And then double click on this rectangle tool and this will create a perfect square. Now I want to scale this down by coming over to this rectangle path here. It's at 2K, which is our comp size right now. But if I just decrease this to maybe something like, let's say 200, I can then drop this into the corner and then just start to duplicate this and move it over and create a nice pattern. I'll do this by entering the values though, because I want this to be exact. So we know it's 200 by 200. So if I just add 200 on the X and then maybe 200 on the Y, 200 on the Y, this will then perfectly align. So I'll just keep doing this until I have a nice pattern, duplicate it again by pressing Command D and then just adding 200 to X and Y, then maybe only adding 200 to the X for once. And I'll just create something right here. I'll spare you the trouble of watching me create every single square, so I'll just skip forward here. Okay, so I created this pattern. The next step is to create a null object by going over to Layer, Null Object, and then just parenting all of these shape layers to the null. I'll do this by selecting all of them and then grabbing this pick whip and dropping it on the null object. You can also just take this drop down and select null. This null object will now allow me to control the scale for all of these squares here. And that's exactly how this was animated. What I did is I took the null object, brought up the scale property by pressing S, going to, let's say, 10 frames, adding a keyframe, then just skipping forward 1 frame. So the animation is really abrupt and happens in an instant. And then just scaling this up to the next step. Then maybe going to 20 frames, doing the same thing again, just dropping a keyframe, going forward 1 frame, and then scaling it up again until it hits the corner. And I just keep repeating that. So this just creates this step-by-step animation here. Okay, but now to take this to the next level, what I want to do is create a motion tile effect and apply this to this whole composition. So I'll do this by creating a new adjustment layer again, calling this motion tile, and then going over to Effect, Stylize, and add the motion tile effect. And as you can see, when I now change the tile width and the tile height, I can create some really interesting results. And whatever I do, we still have the underlying animation, so that changes accordingly. So this is just another system that allows you to really just play around with all of these properties and see what you like and what kind of animation speaks to you. You can also do something like mirror edges that will create a different results as well, because it will then mirror the tiles and not have them all just be lined up next to each other. So yeah, just play around with this. Also play around with the underlying animation, the scale here. You can also play with this tile center property here, which allows you to just drag around all of this setup at once. And also play with the phase. If you want to adjust the pattern underneath this, you can just disable the motion tile effect for a second and then readjust the pattern as you wish. Let's go over to this last effect, which is this choppy typographic stop motion thing here. This is once again a really simple technique. I'll create a new composition, call it zigzag 4. Same procedure with the background, same procedure with the text. But you know, the cool thing about monospaced fonts, by the way, and that's one of the reasons why I like using them, is that when you have different lines like this, you will always have the letters aligned when they're stacked on top of each other. So if I press spacebar, we will have the I and the Z aligned. If I press spacebar again, we have the G and the Z aligned. Whereas if I show you this with just Helvetica, for example, it's a lot more random because the letter widths aren't fixed. So if I just press spacebar here, you'll see it's all over the place. So I'll go for this sort of slanted layout here. And to quickly show you what this technique is all about, it's all in the source text. So if you go down to text and then source text, you can see we can animate the source text. And what the source text is, it's basically just whatever is in this text box right here. So it takes all of the colors, all of the sizes, all of the spacings between the letters, so the tracking, the leading, and just has that as a keyframe value. And to animate this, what I can do is I can just say that this is the end position that I want to have. So this is the text info I want to have in this text box at the end of my animation. So I'll put my timeline cursor to 30 frames, for example. This is 1 full second of animation because we're at 30 frames per second. And then I'll drop a keyframe for the source text. So this means once we hit the 30 frame mark, we'll be at this state of the text. Okay, so this is the end position. What I can do now is I can go backwards in my animation and just set different states for this text box, and that will just turn into an animation when we're done. So what I can do is I can go back, let's say 3 frames, drop another keyframe, change this up to space here, and space here, and maybe even change this to a number, whatever. Then go back 3 keyframes again, switch it up once more, maybe even add another space, delete this, space this out. This is just playing around, right? Maybe I'll delete this, change this to be a different number, then go back another 3 frames, change this to a different letter, change this to a different number, then go back another 3 frames, maybe add another few lines here, change this up. And now we have all these keyframes added here. Whoops, I forgot 1 frame in the middle. And now that I have this set up, it will just go through all of these states we set and end up with the last one we wanted, which is this zigzag. If I play this for a second, you can see it just does this, right? And this is essentially what I did here, just with 2 different text blocks that both animate individually, where one of these has a lighter opacity set. So this is a really fine control way of animating something like this, because you really have control over each frame and each state of the text. It's a bit tedious, but it will allow you to create some really interesting results. Okay, so I hope you learned something from these 4 techniques. What I want you to do from here is just try to play around with these, try different typefaces, color combinations, play around with the settings, and see what you can come up with. It's been fun, and see you in the next one.